Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. Sharing your afternoon with us. My name is Chris Weiss. I'm the manager of global cloud engineering here at Clearwater Analytics. And first and foremost, I'd like to express our thanks to the Idaho Technology Council for putting this on. And of course, Dave Smith and our ELT staff here at Clearwater for hosting the event. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so today's topic is cloud orchestration. By definition, I thought about this a lot. And basically what I decided to do was put together what it means to us as an organization, as a company, through trial and error, because I do believe that it varies a little bit, and I do believe that it's a newer topic. But staying in sync with the orchestrational theme, I believe it to be a concert of guiding architecture, policies, guardrails, automation, various tooling, and best practices. And not to date myself, but that doesn't sound very cool. So I thought that we'd add a little spice. We can call it biodigital jazz, man, for the Tron fans out there. All right. So what makes it all possible? Starting at the top, cloud architecture and design is really important. It's one of the key components. Second would be organizational structure and governance. Third would be network architecture, cloud security architecture, account provisioning, continuous delivery / deployment architecture, a cloud responsibility model. And last but certainly not least, the FINOPS strategy and design, everybody's favorite topic. So my presentation, just to be forewarned, it's a little bit like a round of golf. The front nine is a little bit, it's necessary to get warmed up, but the back nine is going to be a lot funner, I promise. So I just wanted to make sure that we all set the right baseline and we're all working from the same place here. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Cloud architecture and design. I wanted to call out different design scenarios. The first would be private cloud. This, I believe, is the place that we're all working from today. This would be our hosted data center or colo locations. And the next would be public cloud. This is like what we're all aspiring and working toward. And basically here, this is just going to be your major cloud providers. This would be AWS. This is going to be Google Cloud, and anything like that. And basically what I wanted to do is get a show of hands. How many here are actively involved in the cloud? Love it, beautiful. By a show of hands, how many of you are an AWS shop? Nice. How about GCP? Azure? Ah, that's all right. Oracle. All right, okay, good deal. Very cool. All right, so it looks like we have a lot of experience set in the room, and I think that's amazing. So this is going to be a very engaging topic. Feel free to raise hands. I'm very conversational. So if you guys do have questions as we go, please feel free. So basically the next design scenario, in all honesty, that we all have to account for is hybrid cloud. Whether it's on purpose, whether it's on design, or by accident, this happens to most of us that are transitioning from a private cloud scenario. So this is very important to call out, right? As there's dependencies, there's network connectivity and different things that you have to figure out in advance so that you don't put yourself in a little bit of a bind down the road. And this is kind of the newer scenario that we're challenging or are facing with. It's a multi-cloud. So by a show of hands, how many here are multi-cloud? Great, okay, very cool. So we can delve into a little bit of the multi-cloud. In transparency, we are primarily an AWS shop. So a lot of the examples and the learning and trials and tribulations that I'll share are from our journey into the AWS ecosystem, but we are also a multi-cloud shop to date. All right. The first situation that we came across was strategy considerations. And as an organization, we really thought deeply on how we're going to digest everything in front of us. And so I thought that this funnel kind of represented a good depiction of that. There's a lot to get your arms around as an organization. So here at Clearwater Analytics, we formed a Cloud Center of Excellence team. And this is a representation of folks all across the organization, from the development teams, the platform teams, the network teams, the cloud security teams, different areas of the business. And everybody has representation. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has input in the process. And so a part of this journey, right, we start with the foundations. We started with our cloud adoption plans. Obviously, cost is always a factor. So those conversations come up early and often. A migration strategy, if you are on private cloud. That was one thing that we had to get figured out that took a lot of time and energy and effort. Other things to consider: risk mitigation. App designs. What do your app designs look like in the cloud versus what they look like on premise? Right, for us at Clearwater Analytics, they looked a little bit different. And so it did take some time and investment to get that sorted out right before we started our journey. Disaster recovery, right? That's an important topic for a lot of us here in the enterprise. Build and release strategy at scale. If we're going to enter the cloud, how do we keep up with that, right? How do we make sure that we're leveraging everything that the cloud has to offer? Workload isolation, right? This can look a little bit different. These are some different strategies than we're used to on premise. So we definitely had to sort out what our database situation looked like in the cloud versus what it looks like on premise. An environment strategy. What does the development workflow look like for developers, right? The cloud is supposed to be, an all-solving problem. Developers all excited for it. And in truth, it does solve most problems, and it does rapidly increase the development pace. And so we definitely wanted to keep that theme. We wanted to keep that motivation, and we definitely want to improve time to market. So we definitely invested a lot of time and energy into that strategy. Repeatable architecture, right? This is a big thing. This is a part of the orchestration that keeps us in line. It keeps the roller coasters on the rails. It prevents us from, reinventing the wheel when it comes to certain technology sets. And things of that nature. So these are just some of the things. This is obviously a laundry list, but I did want to call out a few of these up here so that we could all be on the same page. But hold on, something just happened here. I just wanted to highlight this, right? What happens, what just happened? I equated this to somebody potentially dropping the ball, right? IAM is a big situation here. And I'm just curious, how many here experience issues with IAM? At scale? Anybody? Hearing? Fantastic. Yeah, so I just wanted to call it out, right? If the permission boundaries aren't right and your permission boundaries aren't set, right, you potentially have resources talking to other resources that they shouldn't, and then a different level of risk that you're not used to in the cloud. So I just wanted to call it out, is that it is a very important process, and the more that you can get in front of these issues, the better for everybody. All right, moving on to the next topic. Again, the front nine is not so exciting, so I appreciate you guys' patience here, but I promise it gets more engaging. Organizational structure and governance. I am not a fan of word slides, but I thought it was pretty important to get this stuff out there, right? The easiest way to think of the organizational structure and governance in the cloud, it's modeled after the Exchange or the Active Directory structure that a lot of us are used to. So what I mean by that is this next slide kind of gives us a better depiction from an illustrative perspective, where you operate from an organizational root, and it allows you to kind of have an impact of granularity and control at a top-down level. So there are policies and permissions and various benefits to operating at this level, but even more so, you have the increased granularity through an OU structure and a nested OU structure. And the beautiful thing about this is that you can kind of differentiate different parts of your business. You can differentiate your workloads from your core infrastructure products, from your networking products, and things of that nature. So that way you have access, policies, and permissions, right? And then you also, the last but not least is thirdly, member accounts. Member accounts have to be associated with a OU. I guess an example that I could give you right at this level would be an organizational root policy for us would be blocking public S3 access, because that's a dangerous game. And that's like also falls into the line with repeatable architecture. It's something that you want to have behind a secure solution, right? And manage your risk while it sits out on the edge. So for us, that's a top-down policy. But another situation that wouldn't necessarily warrant a top-down would be our security or our logging and archive, right? You essentially want to block all of the functions except for the log streams and except for the direct access that all of the accounts are shipping logs to, right? So that's 90% locked down. It's a cookie jar scenario, but that would not apply to the rest of our OUs. So just wanted to kind of shine a light on some of the value there. Just curious. Does anybody here have experience working with organizations from the AWS perspective? Anybody in this? Excellent. Okay, great. So I would be really curious to get your take here. This is through a lot of investigation, through a lot of correlation with AWS and the industry experts. We kind of put this down as a typical best practice. This was our starting point, right? It gives us the ability to separate our product set and build a nested OU structure that makes sense, right? We can treat databases as a product, our workloads as a product, and then it also gives us the granularity and the control to give us baseline network infrastructure and tools, right? So you'll have infrastructure OU, a deployment OU for your centralized core deployments, things of that nature, a security OU, obviously for security controls, audit, protection, remediation, tools OU. So this is where support of enterprise tools and apps would live. And then also, moving over into the more typical stuff is temporary policy and staging. Sometimes these are overlooked. These guys are really easy to overlook, but the value of these are very high. And it's definitely one of these situations that you want to get in front of, right? And I guess the one that I'll call out the most is probably the transitional OU. Right? Working in the landscape in corporate America, mergers and acquisitions are just a normal part of business. And it's something that we should all expect, anticipate, and plan for. And given that, have the ability to kind of set a strict presence in our organization where we can apply policies top down, it's fair to assume that the company that you merge or acquire might not align. So what happens is you can get into a situation where there's risk in migrating this new company into your organization. You can break certain products. You could have impacts on the support structure and different things. So the transitional OU allows us to integrate a merged or acquired company into our umbrella, into our fold, take full advantage of all the benefits of that while kind of slowly fine-tuning the nuts and the bolts around that. So that's just kind of like one of the more important ones that I wanted to flag. OU policy, staging OU is kind of a little bit self-explanatory, but when you're making root changes, you of course want to be very careful and have a testing scenario. So that's why we have that built. I'm sorry, did you have a hand up? I did. Please. Yeah, so this is part of our core infrastructure here at Clearwater. They are not part of this. This is just like internal to us here at Clearwater. Yeah, great question. Appreciate that. Awesome. Yeah, and so from here, there's a sandbox OU for experimentation and learning. And so for us, it's a proof of concept environment. It's completely isolated. And again, right, it gives us that level of access control that we can be more liberal with what we're allowing. Services that are not necessarily approved, right, that might be a little bit more on the frontier, that gives us that ability to be more lenient. And then another important one to flag here is the deletion OU. And this is intentional that prevents accidental deletions of the accounts across our structure. In order, please. Yep. Do you have a question?
Sorry to hold you up here, Chris, but we are not able to hear. I think now we can.
All right, mic check, 1, 2. Akash,
Yep,
can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Awesome, thank you, sir. May I ask, what was the last thing that you heard? I definitely want to make sure we're on the same page.
We were on the organizational structure. That's something that we heard, that you changed the slide.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Okay, great, thank you for that, I appreciate it. So basically what I'll do is just continue IAM integration and governance. And so this allows us to instill a certain set of permission sets, policies that are important across the entire organization. So this is where we can set a core set of policies related to developers, related to network professionals, infrastructure folks, a myriad of roles, and we can centrally manage that in a place that makes sense. But the integration and governance is beautiful at this level because the stack sets are all automated behind the scenes. And if you're trying to duplicate a change, right, you can make one change and replicate this over 500 accounts versus replicating a change 500 times over, a single account. So the next is the inherent benefit of multi-account management. And so the integration of things like Control Tower gives you the benefit of centralized logs. So you can do real-time event detection if you guys are doing log streams and things of that nature. And then also the consolidation point of logs for cost optimization and from the FINOPS perspective. Please. Yes, so yeah, very, very good question. So account boundaries are very important, right? So thinking about this from the enterprise perspective, there's a myriad of ways to go about this, but just a generic example here would be a natural account boundary would be from one application to another application, right? Or a networking account to a database account or something that needs a natural set of boundaries, right? And you get the inherent benefit of the account boundaries, right? Sure, yeah. Yes. It would, right? And so the moment that you move into your organization or into your fold, right, you're now part of that ecosystem and subject to, right, this top-down policy enforcement strategy. And so as an organization in that use case, right, you would have to figure out, is it worthwhile to transition into a new account, right? That kind of gives you that granular ability to test and vet your product set? Or is it an easier situation to move into an OU that makes sense, right? If it's an application, right, you can move that into a workloads OU. That correlation makes sense, but of course you just want to test and vet the policies to make sure you're not going to break anything. Yeah.
Is your strategy to solve
Yeah, no, fantastic question. So it is intentional to inherit natural benefits of account boundaries, right? For example, like you do not want a networking person to have access to like the database accounts or series of accounts. You wouldn't want some of your application development teams to have access to database or infrastructure resources, or even other components of application. So what this does is it just provides a natural set of boundaries that you can inherit from the IAM perspective. And then also too, when you're thinking about scale, one of the things that are often overlooked are service quotas, right? So there's API throttling components to consider, security group rule sets, right? That you can bump limits on. And I'm not referring to soft limits, I'm actually referring to hard limits, right? And so what this does is it actually allows you to scale. You don't have to worry about those ceilings, right? So if you plan to scale at the enterprise level, the multi-account strategy will definitely be more prevalent. Yeah, fantastic question. I appreciate that. All right, moving on to the next. Okay, so network architecture and strategy, right? Kind of just going back to that same model of how we digest and go out and figure out solutions and strategies for the future. Cloud adoption plans, a hybrid strategy? Are we moving into a transit gateway solution? Do we need to factor in a multi-cloud scenario, right? Do we have Google Cloud, AWS, Azure? If so, there are tools and there are ways to go about a multi-cloud network architecture. This is something that you would definitely want to get ahead of, right? It's one of those things that would be painful retroactively to solve for. Centralized ingress, right? Direct connect. Do you need to connect to your premise, right? Corporate location, data center, colo location. This goes right into your migration strategy and plan. Traffic inspection, right? What does the traffic flow look like between VPCs, right? Do you want to have granular control? Would you like to have optics on application level traffic from one VPC to the next, right? Those are things that you'd need to consider. Centralized egress, right? Would you like all of your traffic flow from across all of your VPCs in your organization to exit from the same point? Decentralized ingress. Is it a performance benefit to decentralize the structure? Sorry, that was just what I thought. And again, going back to dropping the ball. Very easy to do. So just another thing to call out. We do have some of our network team in the back, and so I think that they can, specifically relate to this here, but hybrid bandwidth, right? If it's something that you don't get in front of and account for, right? What does your migration pattern look like, right? If you have databases on premise and compute in the cloud, that's a heavy strain on this pipe. So it is just something to factor and consider, right, in your migration journey, and something that I wanted to flag here. This is all hypothetical, by the way. We didn't. All right, sorry. Any questions before I move on to the next slide on this stuff? Trying to move a little bit fast because I know we started a little bit late. All right, beautiful. Moving on to the next. This is just a high-level diagram to kind of give the illustrative reflection of what we just discussed. This is just focusing on two VPCs, but the concept is the same, right? You are routing all of your traffic through a transit gateway, and AWS Network Firewall is subjective. You can always lean into a third-party tool at this rate, but this comes into the traffic inspection, right? This is the centralized, this is the newer model, and one of the greatest benefits to transit gateway. In this scenario, traffic from VPC 1 to VPC 2 would be subject, right? The rule sets would exist, and so that's an automated process on whether that traffic would be allowed or denied, right? And so it's very important to get this right because it allows you to scale. And then again, if you do have egress restrictions, right, based on your environment, that's another limitation that you could set here, right? Any questions on this slide before we move forward? Yeah, fantastic question. So there are marketplace vendors that do a better job, right? Frankly, right, from the native services, right? AWS is very good in general. Cloud providers are very good about digging 5 feet into a 10-foot hole, right? The marketplace by design is intended to take that 5 foot to 10 foot. So if you're looking for increased granular control or increased feature set, you would look to the marketplace. Namely, I think the market leader for multi-cloud would be like Aviatrix, for example. That's a beautiful overlay and a way to connect multi-cloud scenarios. The next thing to call on here would be the firewall in the inspection. Industry leaders like Palo Alto, right? Undeniably a better solution than what you're going to get natively. So yeah, we do have experience with that. Yeah, excellent question. All right, any other questions here? Okay. Cloud security, just moving a little bit faster. In transparency, we do have a cloud security team at Clearwater. Their definition of what this looks like is a lot more detailed than mine, but I just wanted to put this out there because it's a huge component, right, as a part of this ecosystem that we're creating. And so you can see like the theme here is one-to-many, right? Centralized logs so that you can plug in an inherent product to scan and inspect, right, logs, different access controls, and different things, so you can flag events. And the idea here is that you can actually build a level of automation on top of it, right? And so just a prime example would be an inbound rule set that says anybody can connect to me, 000/0, right? Classic scenario. We don't like those things in our environments. So you could create an automated event to flag that and just remove that rule set, right? And then you can safely say that you have an inherent guardrail in your environment. And this, again, it allows you to kind of develop fast, but then also keep yourself on the rails, right? It's a nice designed by safety. So this is kind of how our cloud security structure is set up. Again, going back to the third-party tools, sometimes, right, there are other things that do it better. Prisma Cloud is an excellent third-party product. The depth of that product is very deep, right? There are IAM modules and various things. CrowdStrike, obviously, and then various other tools. But at a high level, are there any other questions that I can help with here? All right, I think we're on the same page on this one. Okay, cool. So account provisioning. Kind of seems like an odd thing to throw into this mix, right? But I wanted to call it out because it actually is important. So I thought I'd just put a couple of bullet points up here for you guys. One of the biggest benefits here is that it ensures that your accounts are created within your organization, within your OU. And then by design, it inherits like the network boundaries, the network connectivity, right? The permission sets, all these different things. And these are things I'm going to call out here, right? All of your accounts are subject to SCPs and guardrails when they're within your organization. All of your accounts are subject to the centralized management, the control tower, the landing zones. This is how you can dictate that I operate in US East 2 or US East 1, but I am not operating in Mumbai. I am not operating in different geographical locations. So this gives us increased granularity and control from a one-to-many perspective. We just talked about IAM and permission sets, a huge value add. Accounts are subject to the centralized logging and audit controls that we just discussed. Your accounts are delivered to the intended environments. And calling out that third-party integration, right? Control tower makes that really, really easy. And that wasn't always the case. So I thought it was something that was worth calling out. Before we move on from account provisioning, are there any other questions here on these? All right. Going back to something that, okay, great. So this here is our current self-service account vending architecture at the 10,000 foot overview. And so basically there are a number of tools and a number of ways to accomplish this. But for us, the idea was to like empower the development community, give them a self-service tool where they can go and check out an account. It gives us a couple of levels of control here. Like it is through Jira. So we do have that native ability to run reports on approved accounts. We can run reports by environment, right? How many accounts were approved for production and so on. This is just the flow that exists today. And so I thought I would put this out there just so that you guys can see how we at Clearwater are doing this. But of course, this isn't necessarily, this is an opinion, this is a subjective thing. Yeah, please. I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, I'm trying to rush through these slides because I do have some of that information for you. Fantastic question. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move right into that.
I just wanted to visit self-provisioning stuff.
You're spot on. That's exactly where we're headed. Yeah, natural flow, right? It moves right into continuous delivery. And so basically what we can do here is we can start with looking at the legend. And you can see that we break it out in 3 different components, right? You're managing your infrastructure as code, right? Who's your orchestrator for automatically or automagically applying infrastructure changes across an ecosystem. Now, the one thing to call out here is that you'll notice that we don't necessarily use native integration, right? Things like code deploy or anything like that. And so we have consciously taken the approach of like remaining agnostic in this situation because it allows us that flexibility to choose our cloud provider in the future. While we might be invested in one today, maybe tomorrow yields a different result. Maybe another cloud provider brings the next cutting edge solution. And this gives us that universal ability to kind of leverage each in this sequence. But going back to the legend, there's infrastructure as code in red. There's the build, publish, and deploy in blue. CloudBees and Artifactory are how we make those happen. And then moving into the newer territory of Kubernetes, we're leveraging Helm chart deployments, also orchestrated by CloudBees. And so you can take any one of these flows and kind of see how it goes. But you see our version control there. We have different repositories for Helm charts, for our IAC, for our application code, right? Any of these changes that are made are detected by our cloud orchestration. And then that would be, let's just take an infrastructure as code change, for example. That would be then forwarded to Terraform Cloud, right? It would be forwarded on to the relevant team or application workspace. And then the change would very specifically and perfectly made to the resource in the targeted destination. right? And so this is how you can move fast, right? In a nutshell. This is like the beauty and the symphony of everything starting to come together to paint the picture, right? This is how you can deploy one application, 100 different times in, 100 different regions if you called for it. And so this is the structure that we're moving from, and the same thing with our application code. Now, the one thing that I wanted to call out is that at Clearwater, we make the conscious decision to tightly couple our application code with our infrastructure code, just kind of thinking it as a product set in its own right. Right. And so that obviously helps us move right into the Kubernetes structure as we move into the future. But there's a lot of stuff on this slide, and I'm going to pause for a minute. I just wanted to see if anybody has any questions or feedback, or if you're doing anything differently. I'd be really, interested to know. Please, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very, very good question. Yeah, they are meant to complement one another, right? And so we're just trying to build in the sense that at some point there's a dependency structure. There's a infrastructure would become before the application code, right? And basically what we're doing is instead of going out, right, we'll just use the old fashioned way on premise. You'd go out, you would set out your core infrastructure, you'd build it out, then provide that out to your development team. And then your development team, right, could either through a manual process or an automated process, ship the application code out. What this would do is it helps orchestrate between the two, call out the dependencies, right? And stating that, right, the EC2 needs to come up, an EBS volume needs to come up, and then this next level of application code needs to be shipped to this location, right? And so it's just more meant to complement one another and ship it as a singular function as opposed to managing it separately. This is a fantastic question. I appreciate that. You're asking about GitOps? Like, I'm asking about oh, yeah, sure. So I will tell you there's another slide that gets a little bit more detailed. It'll give you a little bit more color for sure. Yeah, understood. There are many different ways to accomplish the same task. Exactly. Yep. So, and then obviously there's a lot of healthy debate in that discussion and decision points, right? But I appreciate that question for sure. All right. From here, I'm going to move into the cloud responsibility models, something that's easily overlooked, right? But this is just in the spirit of keeping everything in synchrony, including the user base, right? The folks that ship the code and the folks that maintain the platform. This is our stab at making sure that we're all functioning in harmony. And so this is just a very transparent, clear way to call out as a cloud platform provider, what is AWS responsible for? That's published information. AWS is very straight and clear about that. They're very good about being hands-off when it's not their problem, right? They will let you know, right? So it's very important for us as an organization to call that out and flag that to our developers. So now we know where the handoff point is. And what we do, we have right, again, a cloud center of excellence. We have architectural guidance that help with best practice, right? Cost optimization and operational standardization would fall into that category. But the more interesting topics here would be platform, right? As a platform team here at Clearwater, this correctly scopes out what team you would need to reference if you do run into an issue, have a question, need to move forward in a way. This includes IAM, this includes network, security, encryption, primitives and images, IAC is a product, CI/CD, monitoring, and logging. These are intended to be very broad, right? Because what the future holds is kind of unknown, but these are just overarching buckets of responsibility. But the one thing that I'd like to call out here is for the developers. This aligns us with a DevOps methodology. This is truly operating and leveraging the power of developers at scale rather than centralizing a lot of your changes. So infrastructure and application, we just talked about how it's tightly coupled. The source code and repository, those are team-based, developer-based. They own and maintain their stuff, right? There's no point in putting a team in between to help triage. So all of our alerting and metrics and things like that will go straight to the relevant team that knows how to fix it, right? Or address any kind of issues. CI/CD, right? The same process. They're going to know how their applications run. They know how they ship their code. They know what their infrastructure is supposed to look like. And so again, that goes right to the team. Artifacts, repositories, that's just part of the process. And those are things that they own and maintain. And then of course, their release and restack process. And the reason why I flag that is because that's kind of a hot topic, but I'll just use one example, like a 0-day event. There is a known heartbleed situation, right, that comes out. How do you resolve this across your organization? Patching, right? A lot of snowflakes, a lot of unfun stuff there. So we are of the mindset that we would like to treat our fleet is just as that, more as cattle rather than pets. And so what we do is we have a restack process where we would update our base image, our foundational, and the development teams would then refresh, rehydrate, restack. Those are all different terminologies in different clouds to redeploy their application that would then come up and address the security vulnerability. This way, we're not playing the game, right? What's our maintenance window look like, right? Are we gonna take downtime? Are things gonna happen, right? You can leverage things like auto scaling to update, rehydrate, restack, right? And keep your application fluidly moving without skipping a beat. So that's kind of the power of the new model that we're moving into as an organization here at Clearwater. So I will stop there, and I just wanted to see, is this on par with what you're used to, or is there any different responsibility models that you guys might be used to working with? And understanding it's a very subjective thing, right? This is organizationally, this could look very different. So this is, purely just a question. Please.
You made a point earlier about mergers and acquisitions.
Yes.
So I work at
Great.
That's been a lot since we got bought by Equifax. We've now bought Mitigator in Salt Lake City.
Great.
I think that's an important thing thinking about they're not static. So Equifax had a solution. Well, now we need to have one solution.
Right.
And they're all a little bit different, and they're multi-cloud. So I think certainly like I'm recognizing all of this not just once, but like I think that's important to keep in mind. Like it's a greenfield at once maybe, but
yes.
then after that you're buying a lot of something.
You're absolutely, you're spot on. I think that's an incredible feedback, right? And very important for all of us to notate, I think for sure. The mergers and acquisitions, I mean, that turns into something very quickly. So yeah, I think the more organization and clarity you have around responsibility and setting these norms, then you can kind of just start moving into the fold, right? And that is the idea, right? Fast moving ship, right? And then take something under the wing, right? And then integrate that out across your environment, iterate, and bring everybody up to the same page. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that experience. I think that's great. Yeah. Any others before we move on? Anybody virtually? I haven't heard anybody. Anybody virtually want to chime in? All right, silence is golden. Okay, moving on. The next one here, I wanted to put that out here. It's like, they always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And in this case, I truly think it's worth tenfold, right? In this case. So there are literally a lot of words on this page, by the way, but more or less, this is the responsibility model for our continuous delivery spectrum, right? And again, I think the easiest way to look at this here is to look at the key or the legend. The dotted red line equals team A, specific resources. The dotted blue line is team B, specific resources. That is essentially application or development team ownership in this model. The solid blue line would be a build, publish, and deployment. So this includes Artifactory, CloudBees. Green would indicate our Helm chart deployment through CloudBees. Solid red is our infrastructure as code, CloudBees, Terraform Cloud. Yellow is our generic Terraform modules that are built in-house, right? This is that repeatable architecture, the service catalog, global stuff that we talked about a little bit earlier. The black dotted line indicates global IAC that's used to provision the AWS foundations. And that actually lives and resides within our cloud team and the responsibility model. So from that perspective, the key points here that we flagged, and it's very hard to see, so I do apologize. It's very very small. So I will do my best to read this aloud quickly here. The first key point is that workloads reside within team-based repositories, which may have a variety of workloads. This would include IAC code, Helm charts, and application source code. And so this goes back to the methodology that we tightly couple our code and treat the deployments as one. The next would be is that CI/CD in our environment is subject to a shared responsibility model that we just reviewed. Baseline foundations are owned by the cloud team. Pipelines are owned and maintained by our development teams, which use CloudBees to publish, build, and deploy workloads. The next key point here is Terraform Cloud plays a primary role in provisioning infrastructure across all accounts, regardless of cloud provider. And so this goes back to that agnostic approach, right? Not leaning into one provider over another, right? Today it's AWS, tomorrow it's who knows, right? So that keeps us agnostic. This is triggered through a targeted Terraform workspace and CloudBees integration. Last but not least, this we consider our future, but Kubernetes workloads are Helm chart based and are deployed, managed through developer team-based Rancher fleet repositories. And so we do use Rancher as our layer of abstraction for Kubernetes. With that being said, there are a number of flows here that we can follow if you find it valuable, but I'm not sure if anybody has a chance to look at it and has any questions. Maybe we could start there. Yeah, please. We do. So we have Sentinel policies within the Terraform ecosystem. And then we do have a quality control sonar cube. All right, sonar. There's another one as well. Yeah, but great call out. We do have in transparency, right? There's a lot of depth to each. That's what we refer to as our build release engineering team, or BRE. And yeah, so they're managing and maintaining that for us. Right. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah, great call. Yeah, great question. Anybody else have any questions about the flow? Or I'd be really curious, right? After looking through this, is there anybody doing anything a little bit differently? And if so, I'd be really curious, just to understand. Like I said, the beautiful thing about the cloud is there's so many ways to accomplish the same task, right, at the end of the day. So being in this like subjective situation, right, as professionals, it's always good to hear and understand like the motivation and the reasoning as to like why we do certain things. Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, some form of obfuscation. Yeah. That's a great point. Absolutely. Yeah, data obfuscation and things of that sort, those are very important topics, right? And like I said, like this is just like opens a can of worms for the future, right? There are database strategies to consider, centralized versus distributed, a lot of different ways you can go, right? So yeah, 100%. This here in transparency, this is my domain, right? Within the cloud engineering space. So this is why I'm able to give you this, specific level of detail. But again, each one would have its own, each team manager could show you a different layout. So, all right. Any other questions on this topic? All right, good deal. FinOps strategy, everyone's favorite subject, executives mostly, right? How do we save money? How do we trim costs? How do we stay viable without running up the bill? That kind of stuff. Everybody hears about scalability, right? And I think to an executive, you're just looking at your bill raising more than anything. So realistically, we really just align almost 100% with a lot of the trailblazing that the FinOps Foundation best practices have set forth for us. So I would implore any organization to go out, you can become a member of this. They do hold sessions. They do have nice content out there, right? And these are just some of the high level benefits that you're going to get. Some of the things that you can call out is visibility into your spend, granular cost allocation, team level budgets and tracking. That's a very subjective situation. As an organization, how do you manage that, right? Do you have division leads or team leads? I would implore, and I think that like shouldering and distributing that responsibility is huge, right? Because the bills, the larger you get, can become very difficult to manage and maintain. And who would also understand a spike in a particular cost more than the relevant owning team or division, right? So breaking that pyramid down and shouldering off that responsibility, I think is really important. But more than anything, it's a trust but verify, right? You want to have guardrails in place that prevent the cost. You want to prevent a FinOps attack and things of that sort. So again, this is more like a trust but validate type of situation that would vary per organization. The other thing here is under and over provisioning resources. Moving and scaling with automation is a beautiful thing, right? But also too, it's going to do the same thing to your bill if you're not careful with it, right? And so this is just a good way for us to get ahead of, have I overscoped a resource, right? Specifically referring to like maybe an EC2 instance, maybe you are running a C5 that's like memory intensive, but after an optimization effort, maybe you only need like a T3, right? That actually has the expendable network boost to get you where you need to go. And again, this goes into conversations that are you scaling horizontally versus vertically and things like that. So a lot of that is cost driven. Most of that, right, I believe is actually cost driven. So this is a good place to start to get yourself going. Automation of resources. Again, going back to that governance strategy, one thing I'll call out here is you also have the control over what type of instance types and compute that is accessible within your environment. And so, right, you definitely don't want developers having the freedom to go out and spin up bare metal instances in the cloud and logging off their computer at 5 p.m. on a Friday, and then Monday morning, right, everybody's in a panic because you just incurred $200,000 over a weekend. Right. And so those are very real things that can happen. So it's really important for us as a company and obviously everybody to get ahead of those and have an approved instance type selection in an organization. Also too, right sizing is there's centralized the RI buying process. Once you understand your blueprint, once you understand how you're operating, then you can go out and like pre-purchase. Think about it like wholesale purchase. It's like going to Costco. It's like, I know that I'm going to need bottled water, right, for the foreseeable future. So I'm going to go to Costco and I'm going to get, instead of a traditional 6 or a 12 pack, I'm going to buy a 48 or 150 pack kind of scenario. And that's the kind of deals that you would get through your cloud providers. The right sizing process, the optimization process gives you good granular visibility into it. And then also governance and controls for cloud usage. Everything else here I think is pretty, pretty self-explanatory. The one thing here, and I know we're running up on time here, so I apologize. I just wanted to call out kind of a fringe benefit from tags. A little bit off the radar, but FinOps and tagging are hand in hand. And arguably the biggest benefit to a FinOps strategy is an accurate tagging strategy. These are just some of the highlighted ones. We have a little bit more in depth to ours and transparency, and it would vary by organization. But again, going back to a cost center, right? Making these costs relatable to a department internally, wanting to understand how much an application costs at the application level. Application A, how much does that cost per month, per day, per year, right? Those are very important optics that you can give to your leadership, right? For your designing and your budgeting and keeping yourself cost effective. Also too, data sensitivity, right? We're getting into the discussions about what is classified data, how do you obfuscate, things like that. A part of putting that on the radar, maybe setting a marker for the future, is data sensitivity classifications. And this is something that we push out to our development teams. And if it meets a certain level of criteria, you flag it and you can run a report, and then your internal teams now have that visibility into that process, right? Permission sets. Again, this just goes back to a newer strategy. It's an ABAC strategy, attribute-based access control. And this is an IAM discussion at depth, but I'm just calling it out because it's a placeholder. It's a stake, right, to set on your resource so that you can roll out day one the moment you actually get that ready to go. And then last thing I'll call out, I will end with, is if you are a part of a map migration program that's incentivized in a way, this is one of the bigger benefits of using organizations that we had said earlier. Mandating that, gate checking, making sure the resource doesn't come online without that mandatory tag ensures that you are maximizing your return, right? So these are just standard universal use cases and applications, some experiences that we at Clearwater have come across and I wanted to share. And then basically off to the right, that just shows you some of the reporting and optics that you can have. That of course would be customized to your environment, whatever you guys see fit. So with that being said, in closing, I would just like to say a successful cloud orchestration strategy is hard-earned, right? It's not necessarily a one-click button. It's not necessarily a single service that you can turn on, right? It is a culmination of architecture, process, right? Policies, guardrails, various tooling, right? Guidance and best practice. And I think I actually, typed that out better than I just said that, but I think we get the gist. I will end with, it's worth it. We can all strive to create a highly autonomous environment where we increase productivity, reduce costs, and improve our overall development experience. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you all very much for the time. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad that I was able to share this with you guys. I will hang around and take some questions. If you guys have anything I can help answer, I'd be happy to. But does anybody have any questions at the moment? Please.
What was the timeline involved? Really orchestrating and organizing all this.
Yeah. Yeah, that is an amazing question. I love that question so much. I will tell you this. So this is, in transparency, this is my second cloud migration, right? And fortunately, we had an executive that was intuitive enough that also had this experience in a past life where that retroactive tagging scenario, just to go back to, we realized those pains, right? We've lived and experienced some mistakes, lived and learned. And so this cloud migration here, we were able to kind of go out and get in front of it. So there is this greenfield benefit here that we've had that's been absolutely tremendous. It's not the same for everybody. So, right, I do recognize that. And that's why a lot of this is probably cleaner up front. But again, just kind of going back to that, it's right out of the gates. The sooner you can start, the better, right? The later you push it, the more issues are going to come up. Oh, from development perspective, yeah, fair question. Yeah, I would say it probably took Clearwater somewhere between the range of 6 to 9 months to really bake out the foundations of this entire orchestration strategy, right? And this includes consulting with AWS, consulting with third parties, right? Colleagues, the culmination, absorbing all the data, going back to those funnel illustrations that I showed earlier, really just doing the data collection, gathering, and digesting. I would say by 9 months, we were in a pretty mature state. But one thing I will tell you is this. While it took 6 to 9 months, it's living and breathing, right? You have to stay ahead of the game, right? There are new services, new things coming online that will test, like pressure test your orchestration, your guardrails, your policies, and your best practices every day. So as professionals, this is just something that we just need to stay ahead of, right? It's a living and breathing thing. Excellent question. Did I answer that, by the way? Did I give you? Okay, good deal. Yeah, please. The hypothetical, right? The hypothetical balls were dropped.
But when you brought up the data,
yes. Yes.
What are you paying? File folder?
Sure. Yeah. Fair. Good question. Resource. Yeah, I like where you're headed with that. There's a lot of opportunity. Again, that's a rabbit hole to go down. But to answer your question directly, it is at the resource level, right? It is at the resource level. This is where we're trying to track mostly from the cost perspective, performance perspective at the resource level. That's where we find the biggest ROI. But again, as you move into the cloud and you do evolve and you mature, there are different third parties and services that you can drill into that would give you that level of control, all the same, right? One level of distinction too that I want, oh, please, absolutely. Let's take your question.
What we think is best today, and then how do you evaluate what's best
No holds barred. I love that one. Very good. Yeah, to be honest with you, it's a constant challenge, to be frank. There was a very specific experience in this way where we got best practice that we spent a couple of months on the phone with industry experts understanding fundamentally from the networking, right, and our DR strategy perspective. We show up at reInvent and then we find out that best practice completely shifted and the doors are open in a different way. And I guess the point there that I'm trying to make is that we do our best, right? As industry professionals, all of us do our best. We do, again, we're very lucky to have an architectural community that goes out proactively and kind of assesses these things. But this goes back to that repeatable architecture, the service catalogs and module sets and things of that nature. As an organization and as an enterprise, you only want to move so fast. You want to stay necessarily maybe N-1, N-2 in your deployments to keep yourself stable, to keep yourself secure, right? And so that empowers us to vet best practice and vet these things and then make sure our code reflects, if that makes sense. So again, it's a living and breathing thing, but absolutely it's a challenge. It can be a challenge. Yeah, very good question. Please. Yeah, honestly, I would honestly say all the above. I really think that the driving factors will be different. It could be that there are inherent benefits, like there are strengths and weaknesses across, right? They're not created equal. One might argue that the Kubernetes structure in GCP is superior to the EKS structure in AWS, for example. One also might argue that rather than being, maybe you're a little bit more complicit to an actual DR failure if you exist within the same platform provider. Region difference is not enough, right? So in that case, you might move to a different provider. DR, I think, might be one of the highest, right, rated situations where people would choose multi-cloud. But again, going back to this agnostic situation and cloud providers kind of leveraging their strengths, right, versus weaknesses and, choosing to, leverage what they can do best, I do see that, right, Microsoft has power and benefits, GCP has its own, AWS has its own. So ultimately, as the cloud evolves, I do think this multi-cloud network architecture will be a very huge point for us all. Yeah. Beautiful question. Love it. Anything else? Awesome. Very cool.